You are listening to TMI for the week of November 5th, 2018.
And Roger Stone came out as being the WikiLeaks person? Or
Yeah.
He was the one... Yeah. I just saw something about that last night.
Yeah, by November 10th, Roger Stone and Steve Bannon will be indicted. And everybody was like, oh, you're crazy. Mm-hmm. And then it turned out that on Monday, Roger Stone was saying publicly he was not the smoking gun link between the campaign and the WikiLeaks information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is while he's been visiting the FBI, giving testimony every other day for the last couple weeks. So what I'm assuming is that if he's saying that in the media while he is in a series of meetings giving testimony to the FBI,
yeah, exactly,
it can't be out of check with what he's testifying is the truth to the FBI. And then 2 days later, Steve Bannon releases a whole bunch of smoking gun emails, wherein Roger Stone's boasting about being the conduit between the WikiLeaks emails and the Trump campaign. So, doesn't that look like he's not been telling the FBI the truth about that? It makes you wonder if these guys are going to be the patsy for this whole controversy in the Mueller investigation.
Is this why Bannon's in Toronto? He's looking to be the next person to look for political asylum?
Maybe. Let me ask you this. Where did Giuliani go all of a sudden? We haven't heard from Giuliani.
He's on the island of Dr. No getting a facelift right now. He's looking for a new identity. He just wants to go.
And the BBC says Khashoggi has been dissolved in acid. Perfectly normal news.
So, anyways.
Okay, let me... here's something that's got me scratching my head.
Okay.
So, a lot of people argue that, we can't vote for the party that we want. And that we're always teed up due to our polarization, having to waste our vote voting for a party to strategically prevent another party from gaining power. Mm. But you can only cast a strategic vote if the polls are believable. Mm-hmm. Think about it. Strategic voting doesn't work if the polls are off. If the polls were such that if you felt that you were safe to cast your vote for the Green Party, let's say, you might do so. If you were sure that the party was going to get in, that you were terrified would, have policy that you didn't agree with, you wouldn't risk voting for the Green Party. You would cast, So in a way, you can only cast that vote if the polls are believable.
Okay.
Look how out of swing the polls were in the Hillary loss. So if you think about it, if you want to think a little bit of a conspiracy theory, having polls that are way out of line with reality is a way to disrupt strategic voting.
Okay, I think there's a problem with the question.
Okay.
It's not your question, and I think it was the question that everybody had at the time, because I was convinced in June of 2016 that Trump was going to win the nomination for the GOP.
So,
people were in denial.
Okay, but
I think people were in denial. Well, I think this is what's happening, and I think this is...
The polls showed Hillary had led all the way up until Comey's release of the email scandal.
I think they underestimated... Well, no, I think the polls, the pundits, underestimated what celebrity could do, what could bring to this past election.
Right. But the
Right,
point I'm trying to
and the people were pissed off. People, and I've been talking about this for years, the last 12, 13, 15 years of technological change, with jobs going offshore to lowest common denominator. People were scared. People don't like change, and people were pissed. And this,
right, you're just explaining why it happened the way it was. I'm talking about something different. I'm saying that if you were to manipulate the polls, you would manipulate the effect of strategic voting. And if you think that's a bit too conspiratorial, look at all the efforts that the Republicans are going to keep minority Democrats from voting.
Oh, yeah. No,
in I don't know how many states. Yeah. So this isn't a big, I don't think, jump. But, for example, in the Trump election, so if you were someone who was believing all of the polls, you might not have voted because you were sure that Hillary would get in. So that's one. If you had believed that Trump was, leading by maybe 2%, you would have been terrified and you would have gone out and voted. If you were really ticked off about Julia Stein or Bernie Sanders, but Trump was doing well, you would have realized that as emotional as you are about being ticked off about the management of the Democratic Party wasn't worth risking. So, yeah. So, I think that this is a overlooked effect, and that if polls do lead people in their strategy of strategic voting, it's a very powerful thing to consider.
Yeah, it definitely is. I agree.
Okay, so here's an example. In America, the different election rules allow that poll numbers can be released on the East Coast, and some have argued that that affects how some of the West Coast states vote. Right?
Yeah, they should be closing all at the same time right across the country.
Right? So if that could affect the outcome, then surely polls being purposefully perhaps inaccurate would affect strategic voting in the same way. Right. So if you agree that that effect exists, then you might agree that wildly out of skew poll effects would affect strategic voters.
Yeah.
That took a lot
to
get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's again, it's yeah. I mean, again, it's the question. I mean, sometimes, I mean, is it a good question? I mean, is the pollster taking into account everything that's going on out there, or is it going to be a biased question? Is the question going to be skewed? So, I mean, that's why I have, God.
And then the speculation is that politicians might have access to different polls than the news media does.
Well, that's it again, too, right? And they do. Because I know from working on campaigns that they put out their own
They do their own polls sometimes.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. They want to get a feel for what's going on out there.
Apparently, the most powerful constituent, the one who will be deciding the outcome of the midterms in the United States, are the people who won't vote. So if you think it's the Republican base who will call the shots, or if it's Democrats, should they swing the House and maybe even gain some seats on the Senate?
Okay.
The truth of the matter is that the one constituency that has the most say in shaping the outcome for the next 2 years and possibly into the future for the United States, the strongest democracy on earth, militarily, it's the people who won't be voting, because their lack of a vote will steer the outcome of the midterms. Turns out that number is somewhere between 100 and 120 million people. And the irony is that the one constituency more than Trump supporters and more than ardent Democrats those 120 million people who won't be voting are the one people who feel like their voice doesn't matter, and they're the one thing that will shape the next 2 years.
That's sad. 120 million people. Yeah. That just, yeah. Well,
and you
like
know,
I said,
this posts on Sunday night, and you know, a couple Americans might listen to it, who are the very people who would be walking around with a cell phone and iTunes and podcasts and so on, and those 4 people, Americans who might be listening by accident, and who weren't planning on voting in the midterms, because even less people vote in midterms than they do in. But this is really a attempt by Trump to take his mandate and have it gold sealed and stamped as a mandate to go forward with the kinds of policies that he's been doing already, whether it be jailing babies or...
Well, he did say at one of the rallies this week, I think, if I recall correctly, you're voting for me.
Fred Trump was arrested at a KKK festival in 1927. So just a little factoid. I don't want to taint anything, but...
Oh, yeah. Grandpa, I tell you. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree sometimes. And,
what about the creepiness? Like, a lot of stuff is creepy to me. Like the Kardashians, the whole thing, it's all a little bit vampire-y and weirdly creepy. There's a creepiness. Ivanka, like, even when I was a kid, like a lot of the Vogue magazine and stuff where they're aggressively eyeshadowed and maked up, it freaked me out as a kid. It doesn't, and one of the exquisite skills of human beings is facial analysis. And so whenever anything is out of balance, it's like we know when something doesn't look right.
One of these things is not like the other.
Anyway, the creepiness of Eric and Don Jr. and Kushner and the unindicted co-conspirator Trump.
They look like corpses.
It's, you know, if they're trying to have a royalty, which is a little bit creepy, that's creepy too. But this, it's just like really creepy. Kanye West has given up politics.
Yeah, what was that all about? I was a little surprised about that.
He felt that his voice had been hijacked, and he was appearing to support things he no longer agreed with or didn't agree with. So he's going to focus on art and stay out of politics.
That's probably a wise decision. He's got a lot of fans, and he's done quite well with his art and his music. So, you know, I wish him well. It's so windy outside right now that the flag on top of the Foreign Affairs building is almost vertical.
Strange that it's on fire.
Yeah. No, I don't know how fast the wind has to be for a flag to be going vertical almost. So, yeah.
We could probably Google that.
Yeah. Well, we seem to be having, it seemed to be snow squalls that we're getting right now.
Yeah. The northwestern part of that cloud was blue, and the part of the cloud that was sort of going over Ottawa was green, so you were right in the middle of snow or rain.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was raining earlier this morning. Well, it's been raining for 4 days.
Yeah, it's been raining for 2 weeks here.
Just absolutely depressing.
No. Sometimes I don't mind it.
Well, you know, I walk in it, so it's a lot faster than taking
public
transit.
I had my scratched eye last week, so I kind of enjoyed
wanted to ask you about that.
But you didn't.
But thank you for bringing that up.
Really
How is your scratched eye?
It's okay.
Has it fallen out yet?
Nice. I can't see it, so...
Well, you can't see. Well, that's Fucking damn good prognosis, my friend. Good to hear.
It's like
does it look like
quantum mechanics? You can't see your own eye.
Oh, well. Hey, well, you know, you can probably have a bionic eye put in. That'd be very cool. You could see in the and all the different light spectrums. Imagine.
Well, speaking of stories that have nothing to do with politics and the real world, it turns out...
politics is a theater. All the world's a stage.
Well, the BBC is saying that Khashoggi was dissolved in acid.
I was trying to stay positive. I was really trying to stay positive in this aside from the Lion Air disaster, I was really trying to stay positive in this podcast.
Well, you know I have clips, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So... name that show.
Hogan's Heroes. Love that show.
Let's see about this one.
Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition at the greatest earthquake ever known. High on the rapids, it struck their tiny raft and plunged them down 1,000 feet below.
Do you name the show?
Yeah, in the Land of the Lost, isn't it? Sydney Marty Croft, and isn't it?
I didn't realize it was another Marty Croft.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah.
Why wouldn't it be? You know?
Yeah, I'm not Googling it. This is just from memory.
Yeah,
I think it's a Sid and Marty Croft, isn't it?
It was, but it was unlike anything they had done.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard that. Remember that show for a long time. Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, I didn't think you would get that one. So the week started off with a press conference. Sarah
Huckabee Sanders, yeah.
This week, she said.
And in the pipe bombs, the very first thing the media did was blame the president and make him responsible for these ridiculous acts. That is outrageous that would be the very first reaction of so many people across this country. I'm not finished. The only person responsible for carrying out either of these heinous acts were the individuals who carried them out. It's not the president, no more than it was Bernie Sanders' fault for the individual who shot up a baseball field of congressional Republicans. You can't start putting the responsibility of individuals on anybody but the individual who carries out the crime.
Yeah.
So incitement to riot or incitement to violence or leaders can't be held responsible for the actions of those they order.
Well, I just keep on remembering that there was a certain rally that Trump was encouraging his supporters to beat up the media or beat up the protester at his rally or making fun of people who were disabled. So,
Wolf Blitzer seems to have interviewed Trump briefly.
This woman, Julia Yaffe, with anti-Semitic attacks, death threats. These people get so angry. What's your message to these people when something like that happens?
I haven't read the article, but I heard it was a very inaccurate article. And I heard it was a nasty article. I'm married to a woman who's a very fine woman.
These anti-Semitic...
I don't know about that. I don't know anything about that. You mean fans of mine?
Supposed fans of yours posting these very angry...
You'll have to talk to them about it.
But your message to these fans is...
I don't have a message to the fans.
It's one way to deny responsibility.
Yeah, really. That's...
Here's Trump at one of his recent rallies.
I'm going to tone it down just a little bit. Is that okay? No. Well, you're from Illinois. I had a feeling you might say that. Now, I did a little tiny bit of research, and Mike's opponent, Brendan Kelly, is a vote for Nancy Pelosi and, of course, Maxine Waters. They would say he is the greatest conservative of all time. But because his name is Donald Trump, you have the haters, and they continue to hate. These are foolish and very stupid people. Very stupid people.
She's just thriving off that. energy. So here he is commenting on what effect his rallies may be having.
So you're doing a rally, and rallies are meant to be fun. Rallies are meant to be everything. And I said, tone it down. And then you saw the group saying, no, don't tone it down, don't tone it down. So we had a great rally in Illinois for some great people. And frankly, I think that's probably the way it should be. You should go about your life. You can't let these people disrupt any more than they already have, which is disgraceful.
What people is he referring to?
The bombers and the mass murderers are disrupting from his momentum leading up to the midterms.
Gotcha.
Here's Sarah Huckabee Sanders taking more questions.
At his rallies, since the suspicious packages began being mailed, the president has called out Maxine Waters by name at his rallies. He stood there as his supporters chant "Lock her up" in reference to Hillary Clinton. He continues to call crooked Hillary Clinton. Will the president stop using that kind of language in light of the fact that these individuals were targeted by
The president's going to continue to draw contrast. Let's not forget that these same Democrats have repeatedly attacked the president. The president's going to continue to fight back when these individuals not only attack him, but attack members of his administration and supporters of his administration.
At what point does a national tragedy take precedence over the president needing to punch back? If not now, when?
I think you saw the president do exactly that in the wake of a national tragedy, not just this week, but every time our country has experienced the type of heartache and pain that we have over the last week.
Is he incapable of, in the words of some, toning it down and toning down the rhetoric?
You guys have a huge responsibility to play in the divisive nature of this country when 90% of the coverage of everything this president does is negative, despite the fact that the country is doing extremely well.
We respond with this. They respond with a follow-up. It's toxic all around. They try to defend.
Trump's new enemy, foreigners. Here's his view on the caravan.
And you look largely very, big percentage of men, young, strong, a lot of bad people in there, people that are in gangs. We don't want them in this country. We have a very strong border. I called up the military. This caravan is not, they're wasting their time. They are not coming into the military.
And here's more about the caravan.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Yeah, I was going to say that's it was taken from the script from 2016.
Yeah, that was an old clip.
Yeah. That's prior. Yeah. Anyways.
No, finish.
Well, stoke people's fears. I mean, that's how all good despots get into power. So I'm pretty sure he's going to try to change the Constitution so he can be president for a third term. If he's willing to mess around with the Constitution, so.
Birthplace citizenship.
It's the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
And it deals with people who are born to parents that are not citizens of the United States, and it automatically gives them citizenship. And so the end of birthright citizenship. That's what Trump is trying to do right now. It was 120 years ago. It's because of the death of slavery, and all these folks that have been slaves were not considered to be citizens of the United States. So this whole thing came about as a result of this. So,
yeah.
The 14th Amendment, okay, so here we go. The 14th Amendment was adopted July 9th, 1868, following the American Civil War, to address whether or not freed black slaves were citizens of the United States.
Okay. Here's Trump on that very issue.
Has his wife have a baby on American soil. Congratulations. Your son or daughter is now an American citizen. Does anybody think this makes sense?
Yeah, well, it's, again,
Okay.
I mean, it's worth noting that the 30 countries around the world have what he's trying to abolish, and that, countries like Canada and Mexico. So, it's just really interesting that he's just going against the rest of the world.
Bernie Sanders interviewed earlier in the week.
People coming out and voting and ending this terrible one-party rule which now exists in Washington. There are a lot of conservative Republicans who would disagree with somebody like me on every issue, who understand that it is hard to raise their kids in a nation when you have a president who lies all of the time and who's essentially a bully. So I think, you cannot ignore who Trump is and what he is doing. On the other hand, it certainly is not good enough just to run an anti-Trump campaign. We have got to be talking about health care for every man, woman, and child, in my view, through a Medicare for All system. You've got to be talking about raising the minimum wage to a living wage, $15, and now you've got to be talking about climate change and the transformation of our energy system. You have to be talking about the demand that the wealthy and large corporations, at a time when we have massive income and wealth inequality, start paying their fair share of taxes. I think those are not only good policy issues, I think it's good politics.
So Democrats keep sticking to things that are rational, and the Republicans seem to just get angrier and angrier. Here's the second part of that Bernie clip.
It doesn't give me any pleasure to define him as a pathological liar. I have conservative friends who are not liars. To talk about this president as somebody who is trying to divide our people up, when you will remember after 9/11, George Bush, very conservative president, he went to a mosque to say this was not an attack by Muslims, it was an attack by a handful of terrorists. You remember that? This guy is something different, who will say anything, do anything in order to gain power. And while he's dividing us up, he's off busy giving huge tax breaks to the rich and trying to throw millions of people off the health insurance that they have. So I think it is imperative that we rally the American people, not only against Trump, but around a progressive agenda which demands the government works for all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors.
It's refreshing to hear an American leader speak clearly.
Here's a little reminder from Obama.
Right at election time, suddenly Republicans are saying they're going to protect your pre-existing conditions when they've literally been doing the opposite. That's some kind of gall. That's some kind of chutzpah. Let's call it what it is. It's a lie. They're lying to you.
So we still have 2 more years of this.
I think an association of political scientists have declared Trump the worst president in U.S. history.
Well, liberal democracy seems to be in the minority now. Yeah. And
and if
I think we should all be.
If there isn't a resurgence.
Well, it doesn't appear to be happening.
Well, we don't know. Tuesday. That's why Tuesday is so important.
Brazil is was the fourth largest liberal democracy in the world until a couple of days ago. So it's now gone to the extreme right. The United States is already there. Australia has been there for a while. England is teetering. That's conservative. Canada is teetering. We've just had the Conservative Party, which was split back because it was swinging to the right after it was decimated in the early 90s. It went to extreme right, but then it metastasized into something else 2 or 3 times, and now it's metastasized again into the People's Party of Canada, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. So, no, I mean, Canada, it would be an illusion to think that Canada was immune from this. No, liberal democracies are on the rapid decline.
He's upping the 5,200 troops he's just already sent to the border to fight babies and little girls.
Yeah. And that's normally a job for the National Guard, I was just reading.
Which I think there's 20,000 of right now. But
yeah.
But he's upping his 5,200, at least in his speeches, to possibly 15,000, which would have 10 armed soldiers for every little kid in the caravan. 10.7.
Oh, okay.
If
10.7.
Well, if there's 1,400 people, and some of them will trail off and not make the 1,200-mile journey. But if he sends 15,000 and there's 1,400 people, that's 10 well-trained soldiers, 10.7 for each man,
individual,
woman, and child. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit of overkill.
Protect the wall. But and where are those airports? Do you remember in his campaign promises, he was talking about airports around the world and how he would have great grand infrastructure and rebuild airports and make them the envy of the world. I haven't seen. Was that some of the tax giveaway money? Michael Moore, in an interview this week.
150 years ago today, actually, my grandfather was born. This is my grandfather. 1868, 3 years after the Civil War. And I know you're doing the math at home and you're thinking, you look too young, really, to have a 150-year-old grandfather. But, you know, we're Irish. The men in my family are always married late, had babies late. Not going to go into it any more than that. But, no, but he was, he moved to the United States. He wanted to be a doctor, and there were no medical schools in Ontario, which is where he's from in Canada. So he came to Michigan, went to medical school, and wanted so much to be part of this country, and became the leader of the Republican Party in the town where I grew up. But remember, he was born in 1868, so the idea of being a Republican meant that you were for abolition and you were, you know, against the terrorizing of black people and women should have the vote. It was that kind of Republican. Today he wouldn't understand or understand any of this. But I do know that by being a citizen of Michigan, that he, if he were alive this week, he would want to make sure that the people did the right and the decent thing. All his Canadian values in terms of how you treat people and how we want to live in a peaceful world. Those, you know, he died just before I turned 3. I have only 2 memories of him. One of them, I'm sitting on his lap and he's playing the Irish fiddle. But he was a kind and a generous man. And their walls in my grandparents' house, there was no wallpaper, no paint. It was just bookshelves. The walls were all books. The importance of reading and the importance of knowing facts and understanding what's going on was something that was passed down to his daughter, my mother, and myself. And I'm grateful actually just to be able to tell that story on your show, that this is his 150th birthday, and that I could honor him by encouraging my fellow Americans to get out and vote on Tuesday. Take advantage of this. Our democracy is fragile right now. There's no guarantee that it'll be here in 2 years or 4 years. This is our really, perhaps could be our last moment to act. Don't give up that moment. The possibilities are tremendous of what could happen on Tuesday, and just as well, the Republicans could hold the House by 1 seat. And I don't want that feeling on Wednesday that we all felt the day after the election in 2016. So everybody to the polls, so many good candidates on the ballot now, so many women, so many progressive people, so many young people voting. This is the moment to have your voice heard and to elect new people. It's a great moment. Don't give it up.
And it is Michael Moore's grandfather's birthday. Happy birthday to your grandfather, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching.
That was Michael Moore on Lawrence O'Donnell on Friday night.
Wow. It's, you know, it's...
All that
one
mention
thing I
of
haven't...
Ontario and Canada.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, that part I wasn't aware of, his Canadian connection there. I thought McGill University had was already around in Montreal. I thought they were well established, but I could be wrong. But what I noted there was, and he's not the first prominent American I've heard this, the tone of fear in his voice. Interstellar news. There is a giant, well, they're not too sure what the hell this is. Interstellar asteroid is what they're basically calling it, but they're not too sure what the hell it is. And this interstellar asteroid right now has the name, I'm sorry, I'm just going to spell it out and maybe somebody can help me with this. The asteroid is spelled Oumuamua. Any idea on how you want to pronounce that? Momo?
Momo.
Momo, okay. Well, it says here that the mysterious object Momo arrived in our solar system in October 2017. NASA spotted an unexpected boost in speed and shift in trajectory as it passed through the inner solar system last year. Now, one study claims it could actually be a solar sail sent by aliens. A mysterious asteroid called Momo, the first interstellar object ever to be seen in the solar system, could be a gigantic alien solar cell sent to look for signs of life, a new study has claimed. Astronomers from Harvard's Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics analyzed the strange cigar shape of the object and the unexpected boost in speed and shift in its trajectory as it passed through the inner solar system last year. They have concluded that the strange asteroid might be a light sail of artificial origin. The study could, and this is in parentheses, could solar radiation pressure explain Oumuamua's peculiar acceleration, end quote, which recently appeared online, was conducted by Shmuel Bailey, a postdoctoral research at CFA's Institute for Theory and Computation, and Professor Abraham Loeb, the director of ITC, and Frank B. Baird, Jr., Professor of Science at Harvard University, and the head chair of the Breakthrough Starshot Advisory Committee. They found a sail that was only a fraction of a millimeter thick, 0.3 to 0.9 millimeters, would be sufficient for a sheet of solid material to survive the long journey through the entire galaxy. Light sails with similar dimensions have been designed and constructed by humans, including the Japanese-designed ICROS project and the Starshot initiative. So they're not too sure what the hell this thing is, but yeah, they're definitely intrigued. They don't know why it changed its trajectory. They don't know why it sped up. They figure that it might have had something to do with gassing, and that this thing was probably gassing off, and that's probably why it changed its trajectory and why it might have sped up. So they're just not too sure. Right. So there you go. So that is one interesting little headline right now this week. Let's see. So what's your opinion on something like that? What do you think?
Sounds like a bubble that's solidified. Something that's created a skin and then its insides seeped out, and now it's this light, naturally formed. Okay. That's my the light sail idea. I think is you have to make a few conclusions before you can accept that.
Another interesting thing that came out, and this is something that you and I have been discussing for, the last 15 years since I had a cell phone. And when I was talking on the cell phone back in the day, you and I think you might recall when I was complaining about the side of my head sweating where the cell phone was. And the beads of sweat rolling down my neck, and I think Cindy might have even said something back in the day of getting that damn thing away from my head. Well, there's a new report that just came out in Science News, and this is off the website from Science Daily. High exposure to radio frequency radiation associated with cancer. Reports on rat and mouse studies of radio frequency radiation like that used in 2G and 3G cell phone technologies. And it was released yesterday, or the November 1st, from the National Institute of Environment and Health Sciences. and they've concluded that there's clear evidence that male rats exposed to high levels of radio frequency, or RFR, like that used in 2G and 3G cell phones, developed cancerous heart tumors, according to the final reports released November 1st. So, any personal thoughts on that?
Well, we don't know, but one of our guests, Dr. Christopher Busby, had a theory that, remember, there was a lot of concern in the 60s about living very close to power lines.
Yes, I do
and there's
recall
been
that.
some studies about how if you had some uranium or other radioactive elements that were on the verge of decay in your body, and then you were exposed to radio waves and or static like you would get from hydrolines.
Okay.
This could trigger a reaction in those things that you've ingested. So the pathway to the damage may not be just the effect of the radio waves. It could be how it affects things that are in your body. That was it's an interesting hypothesis. You asked. That's my
definitely.
thought.
I mean, it's a 10-year study,
Yeah.
and it was $30 million, and so I think it's pretty safe study to put your teeth behind, and.
I wonder which companies would be trying to keep that story quiet.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the U.S. Food and Drug Administration said that there's nothing, that they totally don't believe in this.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying cell phones are fine. So
good.
There's no DNA damage at all.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
Island Paradise, Palau, to be the first country to ban sunscreen.
Why would they do that?
Because it's killing coral reefs.
Okay.
So Hawaii passed a reef-harming sunscreen ban earlier this summer. The state law does not go into effect until 2021. Palau's law, passed this week, goes into effect in 2020, after which time retailers will be fined $1,000 for selling sunscreen that contains 10 chemicals researchers believe are harmful to coral and other marine life. There is apparently other sunscreens that you can wear that doesn't contain those chemicals. For example, Thailand just announced in October, just last month, that it would be closing down Maya Bay. And if anybody's familiar with Leonardo DiCaprio's film The Beach, that's where they filmed it. And the pollution from the boats and the sunscreen has killed 80% of the coral. They're saying, look, if you want to use sunscreen, you can use sunscreen that uses zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, because that stuff doesn't harm the coral reefs. Or other than that, you can wear protective gear. So this is why, if you're closing down a whole area because its ecosystem has been killed up to 80% because of sunscreen and pollution from boats, that's not a good thing. I just wanted to finish our story there.
Yeah.
You wanted to go with Donald Trump because he's just so important to the world.
Well, he may prove to be the deciding momentum of a wave of.
This is a guy
fascism.
that locks up babies and children and grabs women by their genitals.
Well, if he is vindicated on Tuesday's midterms, he will continue forward with the worst of the things he's been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty important moment in human history, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, it's, people like him are just destroying the planet, and when you get 80% of corals being killed because of human ignorance, I put these same people up there in the same class as Donald Trump. So I think the reprehensibles on this planet are getting enough airtime, and we don't really need to. I mean, obviously we have to acknowledge it because they're a threat to the planet and to our species. But anyway, so Donald Trump tweeted this week the locker up of babies and children. What does he have to say this time?
On Monday, I noticed a tweet. Well, he tweeted an endorsement for a conservative
Adolf Hitler?
running in Ohio.
Oh, okay.
As he is wont to do. And so I hijacked the tweet, quoted the tweet, and then I think I said it was a creepy Halloween curse from Donald Trump. Okay, so there's on Monday, Donald Trump tweeted his endorsement for a congressman from Ohio.
Okay.
Troy Balderson.
Troy Balderson.
So I quoted his tweet, and on top of it wrote, Trump casts a creepy Halloween curse. As if his retweet of this, as if his endorsement for the congressman from Ohio was a curse. And then somebody tweeted back to me and said, wow, Troy Balderson is from BC? And sure enough, when I clicked on Troy Balderson, it's, beautiful BC.
Oh.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, a few minutes later, he added the appropriate underscore between Troy and Balderson and was back to endorsing his congressman from Ohio. But it was a pretty strange moment when he was...
Yeah.
I wonder if that guy's Twitter blew up. If you look at a tweet from Trump on Twitter using TweetDeck, you can see the number of likes and retweets in real time. So sometimes you can see the numbers just scrolling up 300, 600, 1,000, so it would have been retweeted billions of times, his endorsement for the congressman from Ohio. So this guy's Twitter, I assume, just would have exploded with thousands of retweets just in minutes. Because his little base is out there just retweeting everything he says. For a new segment, Ian and I joined up with Allie.
And now, three middle-aged idiots talk about the news.
By the 10th of November, you're going to see a list of indictments that will include Roger Stone.
Well, yes, I've heard about this fairy tale for like 2 years now.
But gentlemen, don't you think? I think the election meddling is kind of a moot point. I think that's the distraction right there, because the Americans have been meddling in everybody's elections.
Well, they're meddling in their own elections with gerrymandering and voter interference.
The real elephant in the room here, and it's not a Democratic elephant. The real elephant in the room here is I'm going out on a limb saying this, but I think it's the financial irregularities that the Trump Corporation and the Trump University, the Trump Foundation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and somehow the Russians have something on Trump. And I think that's and I think that's what this whole election meddling bullshit. The Americans have been just got their dirty, sticky little fingers from Central America to the Middle East to, that's all bullshit. That's smoke and mirrors. It's the P-tape. That's what everybody wants to see.
Did you listen to the last episode?
I haven't gotten around to it yet.
You fucking cunts. I hate all of you.
If you make a show and you're constantly asking people to listen to it, then that's not really a cool thing.
Find us on Twitter.
I hear the cocking of the gun
Archer
behind my left ear,
twxnet.com. On Twitter, it's that Archer.
I should one day take your website and put like gay porn instead.
Oh.
and the photo I made of you, remember, from Kenny versus Spenny? You can put that there. Do you remember that? You didn't like that very much. Hello?
Hello.
Exactly. He's not commenting yet. Archer's going to be regretting this.
As soon as he said he was going to do a three-way, I started laughing inside going, oh, no. He's just looking at us right now. He's just, hello, Dave.
Probably get an emails warning. I wasn't appreciative of this and that. I think next time maybe you should cut down a bit of this and a bit of that.
We never put on our carbonaro recipe. Maybe as a post midterm therapy, we'll honor that promise.
Oh, there goes a red balloon.
A red balloon?
No, seriously, a red balloon just flew by my window.
I think you're eating too much salt.
Yeah, well, like I said, the flag is at the Foreign Affairs building is like, vertical. So there's lots of stuff flying by right now, not only birds, but red balloons. That's actually really funny.
Symptoms include...
red balloons. Oh, I think I was talking about Himalayan sea salt and then sea salt from the Mediterranean. And then there's the French stuff from Brittany, I think. But anyways, we digress. Cooking. Spaghetti carbonara.
A la carbonara.
A la carbonara. Sorry.
Oh, do you have an... Cause it's not going to work unless you have a mild curiosity on how to make a carbonara.
Damn. Of course I do.
Okay. So
what
we'll do it as a
one of my
segment.
top 10 dishes, man, that I just... If I had to go get stuck on a deserted island... and I'd have to have all the ingredients. Yep.
I don't know where you're going to get pancetta on a deserted island.
Well, no, it comes with you, man. It's part of your emergency kit.
Oh, okay.
So you have all the ingredients for your favorite stuff, So say, for instance, spaghetti carbonara, so I'd have all the ingredients for that. Then say for dessert, like a Viennese sacre torch, right? It's a chocolate cake. So you'd have all the ingredients for that. Or, say, apricot dumplings, or just regular dumplings, you'd have all the ingredients for that, right? So.
And a deep fry. And a source of electricity.
Well, hey, get tidal power or sun. Because you're on a desert island, you'd have, hopefully, solar panels.
A modern
wind power
desert island.
It is, of course. This is the ideal desert island. If I'm going to get stuck and play this game, I want all the amenities.
Dual ovens.
Zero, what is
trays. And
carbon neutral or whatever it is,
the
water
ability to flambe at will.
Yeah, exactly. I want water reclamation system like the International Space Station.
With just a couple of days before the U.S. midterms, Jay Hughes and I wrapped up the episode. At 6 days before the midterm elections, he had scheduled 11 of his Trump rallies.
Mm-hmm. It's a circus, man.
There's a show about Trump and his campaign called The Circus.
Oh, well, there you go. It is. It's a circus. I don't know what to say about most of what's happening in the world right now, as far as that kind of stuff goes.
Okay. There's a list of countries throughout the entire world that have swung heavily towards the right.
Mm.
Some people, like myself, think that the election on Tuesday is like a wave breaker. It's like either the momentum is taken out of this swing to the right, or fascism, or whatever you want to call it. But, America's the most powerful country in the world. It's they say leader of the free world. Some of us chuckle at that. But let's just assume for a minute they are the leader of the free world. If Trump isn't given a good wrapping on his wrists Tuesday, then it says he has the go-ahead to continue with the kinds of things he's been doing, jailing babies and saying there's good people on both sides of the neo-Nazi, all the crazy things that he's done. It's just, if you think it's been crazy the last 2 years, if he's not shown the people aren't going for this, it's a mandate to do more of what he's been doing. And I believe that could take the wind out of the sails of this move to the right, or populism, or whatever you want to call it. This, to some people, is a test of democracy itself. Some people say that we're, in this moment, we are at the end of liberal democracies post-World War II. And because generations like yourself that aren't voting a lot, young people don't usually vote. Well, another point we brought up in the show was, it's funny that if you look at Trump's base and then you look at the Democratic base, there's 100 to 120 million people who won't vote in this midterm election. They actually hold the deciding vote and hold the most power. And yet they're the ones who think their voices don't count, and that's why they're not voting.
You know what makes my eyes go wide about all this stuff? Is not long ago I heard, and you'll know exactly where I heard it from, a different perspective about the whole structure of politics and government. Like the idea that one person being at the top, in charge of it all, is a fucking ludicrous idea. And it works when there's like 30 people or something. It's like you can figure out which one's the strongest and not the dumbest and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's going to be our leader. But with 350-something million people, how can one person be in charge of it all? And the perspective changed mine completely. Now my eyes go wide and I look at all of it and go, it's a fucking joke. It's all a complete joke. And they said the idea of a council makes a lot more sense. Like you could have a big group of people, not even that big, but say there were 20 people that represented that office, and there are people from all different walks of life, more or less. And there's no like giant mess that the next one person who wins the popularity contest inherits. And then everyone just criticizes them on how shitty a job they did, but they've all had a terrible shake at it to begin with. And this whole business with Trump, it's insane what he's done, but the idea of the whole thing to begin with is pretty insane too.
Well, there's supposed to be a check and balance. Like there's in the United States, there's the judiciary branch, the executive office, and then the House of Representatives.
Right.
And they're supposed to work together and keep each other in balance. The Republicans have not lived up to that principle. In Canada, we have what we call the loyal opposition, which is whatever party gets just a few votes less than whatever the government is. It's considered that it's their duty to oppose whatever the government's into, and it's to keep their feet up to the fire. And
right.
So checks and balances. The issue right now is, well, one of the things that Trump, just the lightest little bombshell, was that he wants to take away that law in the Constitution where if you're born on American soil, you're an American. This is principle held by,
this is where the
Western world.
This is where the Council of Wise People works, and the one-person popularity. He's a fucking reality TV star.
Right. But if
where it doesn't work.
If Republicans aren't going to act as a loyal opposition, and he's stacked the Supreme Court with Republican cronies, where's the check and balance?
It doesn't exist.
So there is a very large possibility that the very structures that we've become dependent on for the last 80 or 100 years could really change all of a sudden, and happens at a time where everybody's on their iPhone and distracted, and a lot of the smarter people aren't voting. They think their voice isn't going to count, or they're not voting to protest the insanity of the circus. But you have to weigh that against what we really have at stake here. And when I say we, well, yeah, if they are the biggest game in town, and if we're right next door, and if we see all these other countries throughout the world swinging to the right, then we really could be at a moment in history. I mean, there's one way of looking at it that says that we're returning back to the global politics that existed before World War II. That's very possible. And it's enough generations away from that generation that set up this idea of a liberal democracy and spread it largely throughout the world. You younger people may have to relearn those lessons, and they say history repeats. And so when I suggest that it's possible that this one little midterm here could spell the difference between returning back to a pre-World War II world order, I don't think, and 120 million people might not even vote. It's all possible. This is on the table.
Not only does the one person in charge not make sense, but the rules don't make sense. Not updating the rules, like in America, your Second Amendment right to bear arms and protect your home and all that kind of shit, those rules were written in war times. People don't need to own guns like they do down there. That's not even, oh, my Second Amendment right, I should be able to have all the guns I want. It doesn't even make sense. You know what I'm saying? None of it makes sense. It doesn't. I think the whole thing is a fucking circus. And not just down there, here too. One guy's in charge of it all.
Some countries have it be a rule, almost of law, that you have to vote.
I would support that. I think it's important that people do it, but
I was thinking a tax credit. So if you vote, you get $1,000 off your taxable income.
That would certainly incentivize a lot of people. An extra $1,000?
Well, I worded it so it was just a deduction, but maybe it's a $1,000 tax credit.
No, or
maybe it just reduces your income by $1,000.
That's a really good idea.
Might put you into a different tax bracket.
Whoa.
And I don't know if that incentive makes sense. Rich people, maybe they won't care about the $1,000. Now, if you know rich people, they would do just about anything for $1,000. But poor people, and this idea of getting them maybe to be in a different tax bracket, that may really motivate a 22-year-old who's making the same amount of thousands a year.
It's possible.
Yeah. In Australia, I think it's a rule. I don't know if there's a fine for not voting, but there's a few countries that
we don't even have what is it called? A one vote?
Oh, first past the poll. And I'm into a per vote subsidy. I'm into totally government-funded elections. Every cent spent by a campaign is a government. It's as part of, if you want to be CBC and have a license to broadcast, as part of your duty is to provide a certain amount of free airtime equally to the political parties. This kind of thing. This takes a lot of money out of the political process. It caps what can be spent. It means that you might be elected based on the merits of what you're proposing rather than how much you can spend on the media. It eliminates the American idea of the super PACs.
The world's too corrupt for that.
Who knows? I mean,
corruption runs too deep for something so logical to ever take place.
Well, we used to have a per vote subsidy where even if you're the NDP and you come third in the polls at an election time, every vote that you get puts money in your campaign purse, let's say. The way it works now, it's winner take all in a lot of different ways.
Stupid.
Yeah. And then in the United States, that the last number of elections, I can't remember how many, were decided by the Electoral College. Even in the last election between Trump and Hillary, she won by 3 million votes. And yet the way and then there's gerrymandering, where they just arbitrarily go redivide a district. There's a lot of voter suppression in the United States right now, in the southern states.
A lot of nonsense. It's a lot of nonsense.
Well, one person said the Democrats want everyone to vote, whereas the Republicans want to limit.
Of course they do. It's all nonsense. I don't like it. That's why I don't pay attention.
And so you would be one of the 100 to 120 million Americans, theoretically, who, out of protest, won't vote.
I would vote.
And then you'll sit here and call it a circus.
No, it's not true. I would vote. I vote in our country. But their politics, I'm like...
We're just as bad.
That's fine, but we're not the USA.
Yeah.
We're Canada.
And somebody suggested that every time we come up with these common sense ways of limiting corporate money or influence or special interests in politics, they just find another way to get around the rules.
So there's this idea that American politics and American news is supposed to be like a national thing, right? It's the news in their country. And for whatever reason, and I understand that stuff that happens down there affects us here too often, but not always. We have this uncanny way of making American news Canadian news when it's not. It's their national news.
Well, let me say this to you. There was a time when I was younger where all we talked about was Canadian politics at the dinner table. And nobody gave a flying what was going on in the United States.
That's right.
So it has to do with who's in power and what they're doing and what kind of menace they pose to our survivability. I mean, it turns out that whole milk thing, right, with the trade tariffs and steel and aluminum, and we're a threat to their national security. I mean, all of that is just his crazy confrontational style. But it's a menace.
Dude, he's mentally ill.
Oh, yeah. So that's why he's news. And we should be happy that we're not spending an hour and a half talking about Justin Trudeau. It's more responsible government these days.
Yeah, but it's also on us. Like the things that you bring up, tariffs, things that affect trade between our countries and that sort of thing, that's all relevant to Canadians. But his tweets that we hear about on a daily basis, all the shit that comes pouring at us 1 million miles a second, every single day, 24/7, 365, is completely unnecessary.
Did you notice that during Obama?
No, it didn't happen. Important presidential stuff made it here.
It's not that we are choosing to focus on the United States or we're inundated by it. It's that there's a madman in control right next door. And that's why we're talking about it.
It's a shame. It's a real shame. That's all I can say about it. Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
I'm Dave Archer in Toronto.
And I'm Ian Stolberg in Ottawa.